Dr. Taylor, if I can request you now to please tell us about your association with the book and with the museum and these artifacts which were on display as well, and also the making of the book, of course.
Thank you so much to our hosts and to all the distinguished panelists and guests who've arrived, who've come to participate in this. I'd like to share my screen, please. I believe you will see this screen now and I'm going to start the slideshow from beginning. This should have the screen showing the cover of the book and a few images from our museum, because Dr. Khanuja, whose wonderful presentation has already kind of described and summarized the book beautifully, has just asked me to talk about the history of the Smithsonian's connection to this project and why we, and I personally also, thought this was so important. And that relates to our broader effort to reach wider audiences on the presentation of Sikh art and heritage. And that's been something that we have been involved in for a while, having started our Sikh Heritage Project in the year 2000. It's been a great honor for me to be a part of that. I think Alka, she brought up that her participation even early on, before we opened up our first exhibition, which was this one in 2004, Sikh's Legacy of the Punjab. She was one of our speakers. We had speakers who talked about the Kapani collection. One of our speakers talked about the collection of regalia and materials in Bagrian. And we had a series of events that led to the not only exhibition, but the full range of what we call our Sikh Heritage Project, which was established in the year 2000. And we were not actually, I want to make it clear, planning to necessarily have an exhibition. That was one of the options. The Sikh Heritage Project had a range of goals relating to the public presentation of Sikh heritage in various ways, including lectures and so on, but also research and collection improvement and collection conservation. And so on that basis, there's been a number of activities, and publication has turned out to be an important part of these. But the exhibition was certainly its flagship big project starting in 2004. And we had a visitation at that time of between 7 and 10 million people every year. So many millions of people had a chance to find out about this topic. And this was a large audience that was not necessarily coming to the museum for that purpose, but it's a central location here in Washington. The Smithsonian is the world's largest museum complex with a big national and international visitation. So this was the subject of a lot of attention, and we were able to commission works from India, and also behind the scenes carry out a lot of those functions, like the conservation functions, which were also a big part of our original goals. And that included analysis and research in several areas of the artworks, which has been published in many different venues. Here's just another one example of something that was on exhibition. I will say that one of the big advantages of a large exhibition is that collections often turn out better afterwards, because the budgets for exhibitions can carry out some of the rather expensive conservation work that's needed. And initially, we did not include a publication along with the exhibition, but later, as the exhibition traveled, we continued our series of lectures, and also we continued our other activities at the same time. I think several people here present we met during our visits to India as well in the year 2006, a conference and workshop on museum management, which was quite important, not only for its contribution to sharing ideas about new applications of new technology for the preservation and study of heritage of the Punjab, but also I think it was kind of historically important, because it was the first big conference that we held in Chandigarh, in which we brought together also speakers and scholars from Pakistan and India both at that conference. And we really appreciate the support of our partners, particularly Sikh Heritage Foundation, who funded that aspect of it. But within India, the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, INTAC, and the other hosts and sponsors. So that included several trips along with some of our conservation experts from the Smithsonian, such as to places such as Patiala, where we were later able to help obtain a World Monuments Fund funding for the preservation of this very massive limestone structure at Kila Mubarak. The exhibition itself, meanwhile, continued to travel. Went to various locations in California. This is the opening at the Fresno Art Museum. And during the recent pandemic, it's been in storage, but we are planning to continue traveling it after people can start replanning and definitely expecting to have exhibitions restart again. So that is still very much ongoing. And in the course of this, we were constantly rotating collections. And so we were learning a lot more about the collections that exist around the world. And this is where I would like to bring up the publication aspect also, because we had various forms of outreach. This is at the Gurdwara in Fresno. I participated in sort of events describing what was happening in the exhibition and so on there as well, so that the congregation of the Gurdwara could be actively involved in the kind of outreach needed for the museum. But when at its next venue in San Antonio, Texas, we had so many rotations with different new materials that had not been on display before, that we did decide to publish a book about what had been in the entire range of these exhibitions. And for that, I thank my co-author also, Dr. Robert Pension, here at the Smithsonian. And in fact, we became quite involved in recognizing the value of publishing material that is not widely available to American and European audiences, had not been prior to the efforts primarily of, I would say, the Sikh Foundation founded by Dr. Kapani, but also museums like the Royal Ontario Museum, the Victoria and Albert Museum, their prominent curators whom we all know, like Sue Strong, were able to put together exhibitions in this field, which is, relatively speaking, a new field. And I would say that at the Smithsonian, Sikh and Punjabi heritage was not represented widely compared to other forms of art traditions. So I was able to follow up on a lot of the topics that our great guest lecturers talked about. I mentioned the lecture about the collections at Bagrian, and I met by Sri Sikandar Singh and talked with him. I had a restaurant here in Washington, and I said, we think we could help you put together a really good book about your collection. I could find some good people and we get the photography done and so on. And, he said to me, to be honest, Paul, I think I'd rather do it myself. So that's what happened. And he brought in Rupinder Singh, and they created what is really a very good book about the Maharaja family collections. And it has a focus that's not like a museum catalog at all. You don't see in every image the measurements of the object at all, but you feel like you're walking around the Punjab itself with the gurus and looking at how they've related to it and remembered by every family. As this went on, we continued the movement of our exhibition and looking for new collections. This was the opening at the Institute of Texan Cultures, which is a very nice museum at the University of Texas. And we had a big section of the exhibition about Sikhs in Texas, just as we had sections in other areas about the people who lived there locally and introduced themselves essentially to their neighbors, who often didn't know very much about them, but were interested to know. So it became a real wider audience outreach set of activities of which publications played a part. These are some of the family activities. The earlier one was the opening ceremony, but people got together and there were sort of, activities where people would learn how to tie turbans on themselves. And this was great. And, when tons of selfies got done and so on. I mean, this may sound kind of, not very serious, but this brought a huge audience. Yes. Hello? Somebody is calling me? But anyways, sorry, well, I'll continue. I want to mention this book project also that I was involved in, Sikh art from the Kapani collection. And we had talked about it early on with Dr. Kapani and wanted to encourage its development. And this is something that I had showed to Dr. Khanuja as well. We've about 5 years after we started talking about it, it was time for the anniversary of the Sikh Foundation. And with wonderful work with Sonia Dami, we were able to produce this edited book on his collection. This is a very different kind of book, I have to say, from the one we're all talking about today, but each makes its own different kind of contribution. The turban tying ceremony at San Antonio was part of my article in this book. One of the things that I wrote in this book about the history of representing Sikh art in the United States. So there we are with that. This was a very different sort of publication, but again, we had a situation in which, ironically, though so well known among Sikhs, the Japji of Guru Nanak, often recited every day, really partly, I think, because of its status as a religious text, it really never, in broader literature, took its place in the context of South Asian literature, and really needed an introduction to a broad audience. Here, I really have to thank Dr. Khanuja, because he made available to me, I say to the Smithsonian, in the publication of this wonderful translation with commentary by Rupinder Brar, he made available a lot of photographs of his collections, which we found places within the translation and the commentary to reproduce, that made the book a very much more attractive and readable thing that could be really accessed by a broad public. And I will mention that I met Dr. Khanuja in 2017 in January at the restaurant just over the border from Washington here in Maryland. And we talked, and I had by then seen some of his collection. And in the first meeting that we actually had, I really brought up the idea it would be wonderful to do a book about his collection. But in the meantime, I did put together for the journal Arts of Asia, which is it says here, justifiably, they claim that it's a justified claim, the foremost international Asian arts and antiques magazine. But you notice it hadn't really had an article yet about Sikh art. And so I was able to put this article together on the topic of how Sikh art collecting can be a form of devotion or seva, and what that means. And I was very pleased to kind of interview and visit with Dr. Khanuja on several occasions to prepare this paper. And I believe it was accurate to say that his collection was assembled partly so that people would understand Sikhism and the culture of the region that he originally came from, particularly people in his adopted country of America. And for that purpose, I took the opportunity to summarize some of the basic ideas there. So that led to the pandemic project, we can call it, which might not have happened had not been this horrible, tragic virus, which nevertheless had some silver linings. We all learned how to do Zoom meetings like this one. We learned where to find the mute button, all these techniques that we didn't know before. And many things actually came out of that pandemic. And this is in a way one of them, because we weren't actually traveling, going lots of places, but we had all this wonderful information and the catalog that has resulted. I would love to talk more about it, but I'm going to be very, very brief. So I won't since other people have been describing the book, I will just mention its association with the Smithsonian is in several places, but it is published by Roli Books. Now, actually, we've been working with Roli Books on other areas. So, for example, in the Japji project, because this is the book we published by the Smithsonian, but our distribution is not the same as a distribution in Asia. And so this is the version of the book published by Roli Books. So we did the same with Sikh art from the Kapani collection. I talked with Dr. Kapani, with Sonia, and we developed a Roli Books edition of Sikh art from the Kapani collection, which is probably in the long run going to be the larger edition that is remembered the most. We're happy to say we did the first edition. In this case, we did not. The Smithsonian did not publish a separate edition. That's published directly by Roli Books. They did a fine job. I'll just say that objectively. At the same time, it is a large catalog with lots of detailed information with a very large number of photographs. Wanted to make sure we give the opportunity to group them well and provide an opportunity to have the collector's perspectives, which is where the essays by Dr. Khanuja are so important. Thanks so much to people in my office, particularly Daniele Lauro, Dr. Daniele Lauro, also Robert Pension and Matthew Arnold for their sort of administrative work in handling all of this kind of thing. Thanks to the people at Roli Books, but thanks so much to Dr. Khanuja, really, and his whole family, not only for making the collection, but also making the book itself available. It is a large book. It is a source book. I called it in the introduction, a source book of information, and as such, there is a lot of detail. And it's nature of all catalogs. This is a book I wrote about Indonesian art in 1991. It was published, and I'm still maintaining a file of people's comments, and we really encourage that. I do want to mention that. People for years are going to be doing research on these topics, and if you think something was, in your opinion, from 1792 instead of 1791 or something, tell us why, write it down. We welcome these kinds of things. And my hope is we've seen a few of the, I was suspecting, knowing him, that Dr. Khanuja would do this. He was going to put a few of his new artworks that he didn't get into this book. So there will surely be something following up. I don't know what it will be. Maybe in the future, in 10 years, a revised reprint or something. And I do hope that this will be in various ways put online, and perhaps we'll add emendations and comments by other people since then. It's very nice in these major projects if you can develop a kind of wiki function that people can comment on them and say, you didn't mention it, but buried inside that big image, there's this tiny image here which has this that I think means something else. Anyway, of course, this is a book with captions that are quite detailed relative to captions, but there's a lot more to be said. And I think many of the readers and many people listening here have some things to say that they really would like to say about several things that they find in there. And we would welcome your letting us know, because there really is a very, very rich amount of information that will reach a large audience. And it's books like these that are going to put Punjabi heritage and art history in the bigger context of world art history in a way that hasn't happened before. And that's why I think this is so important. And I thank everybody, of course, Dr. Khanuja and his family, but everybody who's been involved. I hope I finished in my time allotted.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Taylor. That was really interesting, your comments as well as the slides, and also all this information about the other family collections that you gave us right now. And of course, this is going to be a valuable addition as well as information and a collection, a place where actually we will find a lot of material for, whether it's for researchers or others who come to look for this kind of material. So thank you very much for that.